Welcome to WriteCast Between the Pages. This is episode 5 with Dave Rudden. My name's Stuart White and I'm one of the co-hosts.
And my name's Florianne Humphrey and I'm the other co-host. And today we're being joined by Dave Rudden, who's been a writer, performance poet and actor in Dublin's art scene since 2008. Graduating with first-class honours from the University College Dublin Creative Writing Masters in 2013, his work has been published in The Stinging Fly, The Irish Times, Cracked, The Quotable and The Guardian. He is the recipient of the Fantasy Book Review 2011 Short Story Prize and has been shortlisted for the Bath Short Story Prize and the Hennessey New Writing Prize. His short stories have been optioned for film, adapted for the stage and adapted as music videos. His first novel, Nights of the Borrowed Dark, was published in spring 2016. It has since been translated into 5 languages and released as an audiobook, with the film option being held by Prodigal Films. Nights of the Borrowed Dark won Most Read Novel at the Student Library Association Great Reads Award, was shortlisted for the North Somerset Teacher's Choice Award, and was the Irish Children's Book of the Year in 2016, and the 2017 Dublin UNESCO Citywide Read. Since the release of Nights of the Borrowed Dark, Dave has performed in over 700 schools and libraries on 3 continents. He is a literary deathmatch champion, which is exactly as fun as it sounds. We might have to hear about that later. Has appeared on panels at festivals and conventions in Ireland, the UK, Germany, and the US. The sequels, The Forever Court and The Endless King, are on sale now. And Dave has also written 2 collections of Doctor Who stories, which Stuart and I are particularly excited about, for the BBC, called The Wintertime Paradox and 12 Angels Weeping. Both are on sale now, and you can follow him on Twitter on D_Rudden Writes. Wow, that is a very impressive bio, Dave.
Very well researched. I was like, did I do those things? That sounds very good.
We're reminding you about your achievements on this podcast to start. Yeah, I was like having to take gentle breath as I read that. That was a lot. No, it's really, really, really impressive. And also with an impressive bio like that, it makes sense to start where we start with a lot of our writers on the podcast, which is, what is your origin story and where did you start and how did you start writing and why? And how did you get to where you are today?
So thank you guys so much for having me. In terms of how I got started writing, I am from a tiny rural village in Ireland. There are more people on this call than there are in the village where I grew up. And as a shy, nervous teenager, I really resonated with fantasy, not just because obviously, it's big and it's bombastic and it's full of monsters and magic, but because of the hero's journey. All those fantasy protagonists also started in small rural places and maybe hadn't found their tribe or their people. And I really loved these stories, not just of these people going off to be heroes, but them finding a place where they belonged. And I was a huge reader of fantasy when I was younger. But in terms of writing, I guess I started writing almost by instinct. Like I felt I just really wanted to belong to these worlds as well. So I wrote a lot of fan fiction because I'm cool. And I guess one of the things I always say when I do school visits is, if you've ever been annoyed at the ending of a film, you are a writer. And so when in the same way that bands become cover bands, I would see these stories and I'm like, I want to tell a story like that. Or I wasn't a fan of that particular thing and I want to do my own version. So I wrote a lot of fan fiction. I did Doctor Who, I did Sherlock Holmes, I did Warhammer, all the cool stuff. And I did this for years, all the way through college. I was studying English and history. I wanted to be a teacher, or I thought I did. My dad was a teacher, so I guess it made sense. And when I got to college, I think I was like 80,000 words into a fan fiction story and my laptop died. And I just had this like crushing moment. And I think that writing is a lot about how you characterize failure. And I told myself in that moment, I was like, this is a sign. Fan fiction is not going to get you published. Lols, as a guy who now writes Doctor Who books. But I was like, okay, so I need to try and write my own original stories. And so I started writing original work then and started really trying to get it out there. I entered short story competitions. I did performance poetry in Dublin spoken word scene at open mics and things like that. And it was all going well. I mean, I wasn't making a single cent off it, but I was like, people were reading my stuff, people were kind of enjoying it. I was getting a lot of rejections, but 1 or 2 acceptances and 1 or 2 kind of make all the difference. And what it boiled down to then was, I guess I was like, I need to push myself further. I need to level up. I need to find to like push myself through this sort of maybe complacent bit that I'm in, where I'm getting little bits and pieces of success. So I applied for the creative writing masters in University College Dublin, assuming that I wouldn't get in, and assuming this would be almost kind of a wake up call to like, now I should probably go get a real job and actually, go and be a teacher. And for whatever reason, they let me in, and I wrote the first chapter of Nights as our first homework assignment. And since then, I've just we that got me an agent, and we sold to Puffin, and I've just been running around ever since, basically. So I think it all stemmed from loving fantasy stories so much. I just wanted to be part of that club, and maybe get the same reaction from teenagers that these books get me, I guess.
That's amazing. I really enjoyed listening to all that. And it's actually it's really similar. It's really relatable though, because I think it's similar to a lot of writers, isn't it? Where we grow up loving certain things and we want to write like that. And I think we've all done some fan fiction in our time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What was your fan fiction universe?
Oh no!
Dare you tell me?
I have to admit this, and it's really terrible. And any agent out there who I might end up one day be with, I'm really sorry. Twilight. I was a Twilight fan fiction writer. Loved it. I absolutely loved it.
That's great.
Oh, it was so fun. I actually went on fanfiction.net earlier, a couple of days ago, to see if I could find my stories again, but they're lost. They're gone.
Oh no!
So,
I hope you still have like a version of them saved somewhere.
Oh no, I don't. I sadly don't. I don't know where they are, but yeah.
I think that like with fan fiction, people tend to think of writing as one job, but actually writing is like 50 jobs. There's dialogue, and there's editing, and there's character and setting and plot and tone and theme and all this kind of stuff. And fan fiction lets you, it's like sliders on a soundboard, and fan fiction lets you set some of those sliders on autopilot and just focus on other ones. Like if you're writing a Doctor Who story and you're a fan of Doctor Who, you know the tone, you know the characters, you often have a good sense of the world or the worlds. So that means you can just focus on plot. And if you're starting off as a writer and you're trying to learn all of these disparate skills, it's really nice to focus on 2 of them as opposed to 52 of them. So I think it gets a bad rap. And I don't think that's fair, because I think it's a really good way of training yourself in all the different sort of like aspects of writing.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and actually that leads us on really nicely to the next thing I was wanting to ask you about now. I am a huge fanboy of your Knights of the Borrowed Dark series. I remember picking up the first book back in 2016 and reading it and thinking, this is brilliant. Like, it's one of those books where I kept reading, and I'd stay up till 2-3 in the morning and would have to go to work the next day, having read it. Honestly, it's really, really. I think I got in touch with you shortly after reading it to ask if I could do a blog interview with you at the time.
Yeah.
Because I loved it so much, and obviously ever since I've been a big fan of the subsequent books as well. I think I actually sent you a message on Twitter a few months ago to say I was rereading the ending of the third book, and just how emotional it all was, and just what a perfect ending it had been to 3 great books. But yes, anyway, I'll stop fanboying for a minute and ask you the question.
Gone bright red here, but thank you.
Yeah. So you obviously write really sort of beautiful and deeply layered characters, very flawed and distinct, and each of them has their own sort of very unique character arcs as well. And that was one of the things that was really striking when I read the book. But I wanted to know a bit more about your process when doing that. So, for example, did you know about Denizen and Simon at the very start? Did you know all about their various attributes, their flaws, what was going to happen to them throughout the first book? Or was it a work in progress where, you gradually developed it as you went through draft after draft and sort of got there in the end?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because writing is sort of inspiration can be frustratingly non-linear in that you might come up with the ending of a book. With Nights, with the first book, I came up with the ending first, essentially, and I knew where the characters were going. I knew what feeling I wanted the reader to have when they were walking away from the book after throwing it down in anger. But so much of the book surprised me along the way. I mean, I'd never written a novel before, and when I first started Nights, I didn't even really know my own like narrative voice. I'd never attempted anything so long and so complex, and I really learned the one huge thing I learned from starting off writing Nights was that it took me a long time to write because I was trying to get everything right on the first try, because I had sort of a dim understanding of the fact that books get redrafted and redrafted, but I would spend days agonizing over a single word or a single sentence. And the more I've written, the more I've realized that you learn so much by writing a book that you need to sort of allow for the possibility that the book will change as you're writing it. And so it is better to write a messy first draft to teach yourself how to write the book, and then you apply that knowledge to a second draft and a third draft. So while with book one, with Knights of the Borrowed Dark, there were 4 or 5 big cardinal scenes that were sort of the spinal column of the book. The first time you see the monster, the Tenebris, the monsters, because I love monsters, and so I thought a lot about that scene. I always play these scenes as movies in my head, usually to very loud rock music. Um, the big twist at the end, the sort of like the midpoint big kind of action scene. And I had played these scenes so often in my head, I knew them really well, but what I didn't have a great sense of was the connective tissue between them. So in that first draft, essentially each character has a job. Each character is there to fulfill a specific purpose, be it plot or be it for, the main character kind of like push the main character on their way. You see that a lot in fantasy with like the Fellowship of the Ring is a perfect example. These characters are there to protect Frodo, to teach Frodo before he has to go off on his own. And in that first draft, that's what I focus on. It's just trying to hammer down the plot, trying to figure out what needs to be in the book, what scenes need to be there, what characters need to be there. And then when you come in with the second draft and the third draft, it's all about making the reader forget that these characters are here to do a job. Like I think the best thing you can do with a story is make the reader forget they're reading a book and make them feel like they actually know these people and they're resonating with them, and all of this is sort of like somehow playing out in front of them. So at the start, when I'm devising a character, it is about what purpose they serve, and then I try and pack them full of nuance and depth and backstory and complex motivations so they feel like completely well-rounded people. It's That to me is the really fun part, is the sort of almost tricking the reader into forgetting that this is just a set of lines on a page by making them flawed and making them interesting and making them unpredictable, but also weirdly consistent all the way through. So I love twists in a story, and you always want people to go, as opposed to going, what? You have to kind of, it's a really fine line you have to walk.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much. That's a real character masterclass for us all.
I was writing down notes like,
yeah.
Each character has a job, must look at my books now and have a look.
No,
it's really
brilliant.
interesting.
And
it was really
thanks
good.
for sharing that. Yeah,
Not at all.
that's brilliant. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about was when I read the books, you have the most unique way of describing things. Unlike any author I've read before. I can look at some of your descriptions and just tell that that's a Dave Rudden book because because of the way that you describe it. And sometimes like I know what you mean when you do the description, but there's no way on in this universe I would have ever said those words myself and described it in that way. Which is a delight to read when you're going through a book. Is this part of your sort of initial drafting process? Do these descriptions just sort of come out when you're thinking about the scene? Because you said a minute ago you're quite a visual, almost movie-like writer when you're you're visualizing, writing your scenes. Is that something that comes out initially, or is it something you really have to refine and get through in the redrafting process?
It's definitely something that gets refined and redrafted. So I thank you. You're very kind. I'm very into my like my language and my descriptions and my poetry, especially when writing for young people, because I used to teach English, and poetry is the hardest thing to get teenagers to care about. And I think that if you can slip a bit of poetry into their prose, if you can like have, you know, some sword fights and some monsters to sort of help the poetry go down, it's going to get them interested in the really fun interplay of words and language. And for me, it comes from a few different places. So I used to do a lot of spoken word and poetry, and because poems are so brief and often you're reading these poems aloud, you have to have each line as punchy and as sharp and as memorable as possible. And there's something about that feeling of sitting in a bar or in a venue, and someone describes something that you know yourself, but they say it in a way that you've just never thought of before. And that's something that comes across, and you see it in, I hate the phrase literary fiction because all fiction is literary, but fiction that focuses more on language than plot, we'll say.
Hmm.
Really, really beautiful stuff, and I try and bring that to my stories of magic and my monsters. It also came from I started off doing a lot of, like, I did writing groups when I was kind of starting writing, and I have a friend called Graham who is a horror writer, and Graham's work is like every sentence is tuned like a guitar string. It's so tightly edited and so sharp, and he like refuses to ever use the same description twice. So at one point he describes a sunset as the color of cotton buds dipped in tea, and I was like, that's correct. And yet I never would have thought of that. And so he really instilled in me a desire to strive for that sort of perfect phrase. And my favorite description, I think, in the first book is my one of my villains, the man in the waistcoat, is speaking, and um, he says he says the word exciting, and the word rolled off his tongue like a cockroach, or the word skittered from his tongue like a cockroach.
Oh,
And I spent a whole day on that phrase because Graham edited my first chapter, and he was like, the word rolled from his tongue like a cockroach. He's like, Dave, cockroaches don't roll. And I was like,
yeah.
you're right. So I sat with a thesaurus for like an hour trying to, the word crawled from his tongue. No, no, maybe I'll change it to woodlouse or pillbug or something that rolls. Armadillo, that doesn't work. And I finally found the word skittered from his tongue like a cockroach, and it just felt like correct. But that is not something you do on the first. That is what, like, my first drafts are so messy, and often they're really long in terms of description because I'm just trying out different phrases. I'm sort of walking around the characters going, you look like this, and you look like this, and you look like this, and you look like this. And then I'll come up with a good one and I go, oh, he looked like this. And then later in second draft and third draft, you play Jenga and you take away all the descriptions that aren't good, and you just left with like one. It's really the Hunger Games in terms of description.
Yeah.
You take away all the shoddy ones, and then you have just the one, because like you want to leave room for the reader to build their own picture, but sometimes you can find this sort of like I grew up on Terry Pratchett, and he is so colloquial with his descriptions. Like, it's almost like your mate telling you a story, but they're always perfectly polished, and they're really, really smart and really sharp. And I would never think that I could write like Terry Pratchett, but I strive for that sort of clarity but originality. Like, you're not
Mhm.
going for the obvious, but you're going for something someone will go, oh yeah, that does make sense. So
I think the skittered off his tongue like a cockroach has actually made me had a really physical reaction to that. I'm like,
good.
my tongue. I'm not going to be able to forget that now.
It is, yeah, it's the worst. Like, if you're not slightly retching as you're writing your own stuff, what are you doing, you know?
Yeah, wow,
Um,
that is a really good. I could, yeah. Oh, not gonna be able to forget that now. No, that is amazing. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how. It's good to know that those descriptions don't come until a bit later, though, and your first draft is. I'm sure our listeners will be happy to hear that.
oh no, like description is something you can be tweaking up until the proof, you know? And I really feel that when you're attempting something as large and as complicated as a novel, the best thing to do is sort of ascribe one job to each draft so you don't feel overwhelmed. So let your first draft be plot, let your second draft be character and fleshing out description, and let your third draft be going back and polishing each sentence and each word, and really like asking yourself, does this extra bit of description need to be there, or can I just punch up the first one so it does all the work for me? But like, that's even before you get like edited. And then like the great thing about having an editor, and like I was very lucky, I've been very lucky with my editors, is that it becomes a conversation with another person, where my editor for Nights, Ben, would challenge me on descriptions. He'd say, you know, those first two are good, but do we need four descriptions of the monster? Because like I love being florid and over the top, and he would like really like drill into my sentences and make me take out anything that didn't absolutely need to be there. But that's something you have to do with people. And I think even before you're at the editing stage with a professional editor, joining writing groups and going to writing classes is a really useful way of getting someone else's eyes on your work and hearing someone else's opinion about whether maybe you've described this person 9 times and you could maybe bring it down to 5. Maybe.
That's amazing. Oh, I think I could listen to you talk about writing processes all day.
Me too.
But I will go on to the last topic before this ends up being like a 4-hour podcast of me asking and Stuart asking loads of questions. Yeah, I mean, in our podcast notes, we've got Doctor Who in capital letters, all caps. So that shows how excited we are about this last question. But yeah, I mean, as we mentioned at the beginning, Stuart and I are fangirl and fanboy Doctor Who people. And so the question is, I guess, with your Doctor Who stories, first of all, how did that opportunity come about? Because that's quite a big, a big thing to be asked to do. And also just how did you go about writing, taking on the responsibility, I guess, of writing about such an iconic story world, while also kind of making it your own and also staying true to it and making sure that the fans kind of recognize the world. And that must be quite difficult to navigate, but yeah, it'd be lovely to hear about that.
Responsibility is a really good word for it, because you are taking something that a lot of people love, and you have to be so careful with it. Like with Knights of the Borrowed Dark, because that is an original story, all I had to worry about was it being good or bad. But with Doctor Who, you can be wrong. There is an established canon, and people have a lot of feelings about Doctor Who, myself included. And it's the whole tread softly because you tread on my dreams kind of thing. So you have to be very, very careful and treat it with a lot of respect, because it is a responsibility, and I think a huge privilege as well. How it came about was it was just before the first Knight's book came out, and I'd been brought to a sort of a celebratory dinner with Puffin, and I was very nervous. It was all very fancy. I was filling my pockets with bread rolls because I hadn't eaten that week because I was very poor before the book sold. And I was at this dinner, and I was talking to a very nice publishing person, and I mentioned that I really like Doctor Who, and they were like, "Oh, well, we publish Doctor Who. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing?" And I nearly took her arm off the shoulder. I was like, "Yes." And my editor leaned across, was like, "Not until he's finished the trilogy." And true to his word, when the third book came out, I got a phone call from my agent, Claire, who is wonderful. And she said, "So listen, Dave, Puffin want you to write a Doctor Who book. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing?" And again, I was like, "Yes." And she said, "Now, they need it in 3 months. Can you do that?" And I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Can you actually?" I was like, "I have no idea." But I guess let's find out. And I couldn't have been a brief more suited to my taste, because the first book is a collection of short stories centered on the monsters, and the monsters are my favorite part of Doctor Who. And so I got to basically sort of take 12 6,000 word short stories and sort of speak to what I found most interesting about 12 of Doctor Who's most iconic foes. And that was really fun. When you're writing, as opposed to trying to get something made on TV, you kind of have a much broader scope of what you'd be able to do, but you can also zero in on small things that mightn't get. I mean, I think they spend like, it's more than £1 million on each Doctor Who episode, and so they sort of have different constraints that they need to look at. Whereas for me, I could kind of delve into really small areas that mightn't get a whole episode to themselves. So it's a fun book. I mean, there's a 12th Doctor versus the Weeping Angels story, which is a little bit like, it's sort of modeled after the Mask of the Red Death. There is a story which is it's the educational video that plays inside a Sontaran's head in the 7 minutes between being born and being dropped on the battlefield. So hearing Nicholas Briggs do the audiobook and be like, congratulations, you have become a Sontaran. Please kill everything in front of you is ridiculous. There's a story set during the Time War with the Nightmare Child. It was my opportunity to take the things I love about Doctor Who and sort of delve into them. And I had to do an awful lot of research. Everything was like triple and quadruple fact checked by the BBC, and to a kind of a hilarious extent at times, because I remember one of my short stories is a Cyberman with a barcode for a name, and there's a long email chain. Oh, did we ever name the Cybermen? Do the Cybermen have names? And I was like, in the 10th planet, one of them is called like Krang, but you haven't named them in years. And they're like, okay, well, make it clear it's just this group of Cybermen. So we're not saying a blanket. We don't really speak for all Cybermen. I was like, okay, sure, and tweaking all these different things. And it was really fun. I had so much fun sort of delving into one story in particular is very close to my heart because it's called The Rhino at 22 Strand Street. And the third person I told about doing this book was my friend Sarah Griffin, who's a brilliant YA author. And when I told her, she was like, "Oh, I must tell my mum." And I was like, "Why? Why? Not that I have any qualms with you telling the wonderful Patricia, but like, why? Why are you telling her?" And she told me this story that her mother had grown up in Ringsend in Dublin in the 70s and had been a huge fan of Doctor Who. So much so that her grandmother had wrote to Doctor Who telling them to stop making it so scary because it was giving Patricia nightmares. But Patricia was really Doctor Who made her love science, and she was really into physics. She was obsessed by science, and she was going to a sort of a convent school, like a nunnery school, and the nuns had basically told her that girls don't do science. Science is for men, and that she should basically like limit her ambitions and expectations because, and this is a direct quote, like they're going to do you no good because you're going to end up at the kitchen sink because that's where girls go. And when she told me this story, and they bullied her out of liking Doctor Who, I was like, do you want me to make her part of the Doctor Who universe? And I went to and I immediately had this idea for a story because I had to write a Jadoon short story. And the Jadoon are not a complicated species. So I had been searching for something. So I wrote this story about a little girl called Patricia finding a baby Jadoon, or what she thinks is just a large rhino child, in a house next door, and it's kind of Black Beauty, except with Jadoon. And I worked in all those quotes from those nuns, and this little girl has been forced to be a certain shape by the world. And I had asked my editor, because this was pre-13th Doctor coming out, and I was like, it has to be the 13th Doctor, and clearly it has to be. And the BBC said no. They were like, we haven't aired any episodes yet. We can't give you access to the scripts. I'm afraid we like your idea for the pitch or whatever, but we just can't do it. So I said, okay. And I wrote the story anyway. And I sent it to them. And my editor got in touch and was like, okay, I cried. Fine, we'll put it in. I'll talk to the BBC. We'll sort it out. And so now Patricia Kiernan is now officially part of the Doctor Who universe. And that meant a lot to me. And then the second collection I did is the Wintertime Paradox. And that's kind of, both collections are kind of Christmas themed a little bit. And that was a chance to explore. I explored like older doctors then, and I brought back Faction Paradox, who were an incredibly obscure Doctor Who villain from the books, who are basically sort of like Time Lord Paradox cult worshippers. It's so mad to see my name beside that logo, the logo I've loved since I was a kid, and it's a huge responsibility. You're basically, the way I look at it is, it's a huge, complicated house, and you're adding a tiny room to it. So I certainly don't think I'm like rewriting or changing the structure as a whole, but I'm just adding my own little corner to it, I think.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great story.
I know, I loved hearing that. That was brilliant.
Do you guys have favourite doctors? Or favourite villains, actually?
Oh, no. Oh, well, I was actually going to say the Weeping Angels, to be honest with you, so it's really good that you've got that as a monster in your...
They were a lot of fun.
Just any of the monsters that are sort of almost human-like, but not, are my favourite ones, because they're sort of eerie and familiar but unfamiliar at the same time. They're my favourites, I'd say, any of those.
in the Wintertime Paradox, the 10th Doctor and Rose go to an Auton Panto, and it's exactly as horrifying as so like I love the Autons because again they look like people until they don't, and that's
Yeah.
really frightening and gross.
That's a really
What about
good
yourself, Stuart? Have your favorite villain?
Favorite villain? Good question. I quite liked number 10 and the Master. I thought that was
Oh,
quite a
yeah.
nice one. You know, the season. What was that? Season 3. That would have been of the relaunch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The reveal of John Sims is one of my favorite moments in
Yeah.
TV. That you are not alone, and they're like, yeah, he was
Yeah.
great. That end of season arc, I think, is really really great.
It's brilliant. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Russell T Davies as well, who is the
Yeah.
you know the lead screenwriter and so on in those series as well. And I read his. Have you read his The Writer's Tale book?
I haven't. I've heard amazing things about it.
Yeah, you should read that. It's like the insights into his process, obviously writing the things, but also just how it all came together and developed and so on. It's really interesting.
Brilliant. Yeah, let's check it out.
Super. Okay, and sorry, we could actually, I could listen to you talk about Doctor Who all day and we could
Yeah.
chat about it.
Yeah.
But we have reached that stage of the episode where we are going to do the guest versus host quiz.
Okay.
So you have a very important decision coming up here, Dave. You can either take on myself or Florian in the quiz.
Florian, let's go first.
Yay.
Okay, head to head.
Okay, so I'll be the quiz master. I'll ask the questions. Now, it doesn't really work with shouting out or putting your hand up or whatever. So I'll just take it in turns to ask one of you first.
Very
and we'll trust that the second person will always be honest. Okay, perfect. Right. So the first question is, what kind of creature is Eragon in The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini?
So which one of us?
So
Yeah,
Florian, do you want to go first for that one?
I think I've got the right book. Is he a dragon? A dragon?
Okay, Dave.
I'm trying to remember, is Aragon the dragon or the person?
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I'm gonna say dragon.
Okay. It is actually the human, the person.
Oh no!
See, I focus on the dragons. I'm like,
Yeah.
It's like the Frankenstein thing where you don't know. People get confused between the monster and the person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, perfect. Number 2, in Lauren Child's Charlie and Lola books, what is the name of Charlie's best friend?
I'm afraid I haven't read them. I don't know.
I was going to say, Dave, do you want to go first? Because
No,
I don't have a clue.
I don't.
Um,
This thing, I've been on paternity leave for the last 6 months, so like I don't know. Quick, look at the answer.
quick. Oh,
Google.
we were going to quick Google that. No,
Okay, so I cut out again there.
I will try and give my answer.
Yeah.
Is it Charlie's friend? Did you say?
Yeah.
Peter. Don't know.
Okay, Dave.
I haven't read them. I don't know.
Oh dear. It's Marvin.
Marvin.
Oh no. Okay.
The only reason I put that in is because my daughter loves Charlie and Lola.
Oh, brilliant.
She watches the series and the TV, so I popped that one in. That was a bit of a red herring. But question 3: in the Hunger Games, what is the name of Katniss Everdeen's younger sister? So, Dave, you can go first for this one.
It's Primrose, isn't it?
And Florian.
Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna say like Prue or something, but it is Primrose. Prim, isn't it? But I won't take that one.
Yeah, it is Primrose. Yeah,
Oh,
I think
okay.
was
done.
Prue was she the girl from the other district?
I don't know where I've got Prue. Oh, I think I've been watching the Nevers on Netflix, and the Prudence is the woman in that. That's a really good TV series.
Oh,
It's just
I'll check it out.
Yeah, it's a sci-fi Victorian series.
I've seen the I've seen the is that the that's yeah I've seen the trailers for it. I must.
Oh,
must
it's
check it
really
out.
good. Would recommend the Nevers. Good. Yeah. Very.
I'm sort of like we normally we're a big like we love binging our series in this house, but with our little Sam, it's we're sort of we can't process anything that takes any sort of brain energy at all. So like it's mostly MasterChef, the professionals we're watching at the minute. So like ask me anything about like leak confit and whatever, but like if you ask me about actual TV, I'm like I don't know.
Oh, that's so
Right,
good.
brilliant. On to question 4. In which fictional series would you find Crossland High School? And we'll go for Florian first for this one.
I actually have no clue. I don't know. I don't know how to guess that. No, I'm gonna pass on that one. Sorry, Stuart.
No problem.
I don't
Dave?
know either. That's a shameful.
No worries, no worries. It's the Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Oh, I love that as well.
I do. Okay, to redeem myself, I can share a fact about Jeff Kinney.
Yeah,
That I know.
Yes.
The secret publishing fact. Jeff Kinney loves karaoke. We had the same publicist, and apparently, anytime he comes to England, it's karaoke or nothing. Like if they anything else they come up to like entertain him, he's like, no, it has to be karaoke. And apparently, he's a really good singer as well. So like technically, he shouldn't be allowed to karaoke because karaoke is for people who can't sing. Yeah, Jeff Kinney karaoke, it's a whole big thing.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
I love that.
That's a good
what
story.
A great
I think
demand.
I definitely think that's worth a bonus point.
Yeah, you get a bonus point for
I
publishing
successfully
insights.
smoke screened my inability to answer questions.
Okay, brilliant. So the final question of our quiz is: in which American city is Veronica Roth's Divergent set? So the Divergent series, which city was that set? Dave, you can go first this time.
Okay, I don't know, so I'm gonna guess. There are only so many cities. I don't feel it's like New York, so Chicago, let's say.
Okay,
Oh,
Florian.
I'm copying you. I went through the same thought process. If it can't be New York, so it's going to be Chicago. But I feel like I have to go for something different because I'm guessing.
No,
as well.
no. We can both be right or both be wrong.
We'll go for Chicago. I was going to go for Chicago, yeah, because I thought that was the next obvious city.
And Chicago is the right answer. Well done.
No way.
I shouldn't have said I hadn't read. Damn. Oh, I always knew that. Chicago, of course.
Yeah, I was going to be like, yeah, that wasn't an educated guess at all. That was definitely something that I knew.
Yeah.
Brilliant, well done. So I think Dave has just edged that one, courtesy of his Jeff Kinney knowledge on karaoke.
Yep. I knew that fact would come in useful at some point.
Yeah. I don't think he'll ever listen to our podcast, but if he does, then
I hear he listens every week. I think.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, it's been a real pleasure and a real enjoyable 40 minutes or so we spent chatting to you, Dave. Really enjoyed every single second of it.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. And we genuinely could talk all day with you, but we will let you get back. I know you're a new dad, and you've got plenty of other things to work on, your next books and so on. So we'll let you get away for now. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
thank you both so much. Take care. Bye, guys.
Thank you.